It is August 8, 1944, and the night sky above the North Sea churns with cloud and gathering storm. A German destroyer, the Z-35, cuts through the darkness at 20 knots, her captain confident in the expertise of his crew and the protective measures the Kriegsmarine has put in place. She is returning from operations against Allied convoys, riding high in the water, her holds comparatively empty. Around her, sister ships and patrol vessels move in loose formation. Somewhere ahead lies the safety of German-controlled waters. What the captain does not know, what no one aboard can possibly know, is that the seabed beneath his vessel is no longer simply dead matter and sediment. It is alive with purpose. It is watching. It is waiting. As the Z-35 passes over a particular stretch of water off the Norwegian coast, a device lying dormant in the mud beneath her keel suddenly awakes. It listens. It analyzes. It recognizes the acoustic signature of a warship, not a merchant vessel. And in that moment of recognition, it makes a decision, the same kind of decision that would take humans decades to teach machines to make. The Z-35 erupts in a catastrophic explosion. She sinks in minutes, taking 240 of her crew to the bottom. It is one of the most extraordinary anti-ship kills of the entire war, achieved not by brave sailors or accurate gunners, but by a piece of British engineering so sophisticated, so far ahead of its time, that its true capabilities were kept secret for decades. This is the story of the Oyster Mine, the first weapon system that could truly think for itself. The problem facing the British naval defense establishment in the early years of the Second World War was devilishly simple to state, but monstrously difficult to solve. Ships are the lifeline of an island nation, and Britain's lifeline was being slowly strangled. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic in ever greater numbers. German surface raiders struck without warning. German fast attack craft harassed coastal convoys. But there was a category of threat that proved almost impossible to counter through traditional naval means. The German minesweeper fleet, supported by mine-laying operations that were becoming increasingly aggressive and increasingly successful. Between 1939 and 1944, mines, particularly magnetic mines and acoustic mines of German design, had sunk or damaged well over 2 million tons of British shipping. These were not spectacular sinkings that made headlines in the newspapers. They were death by 1,000 cuts, slow strangulation, each ship stealing away into the dark, carrying merchants and naval personnel to the bottom. The existing British answer to this problem was the towed minesweeper, crewed by brave and desperate men who dragged metal instruments through waters they knew to be lethal. These sweepers worked after a fashion. They cleared channels. They allowed convoys to proceed, but they were reactive. They required the sweepers to pass over the same ground repeatedly, and they did nothing against the latest generation of German mines, the ones that lay dormant until they detected a target, the ones that could count, the ones that demanded not to be swept at all but to be somehow outsmarted. The German Navy understood something crucial that the British were only beginning to grasp. The future of naval mining lay not in simple passive devices, but in mines that could be selective. A mine that detonated against any ship was inefficient. It might destroy a merchant vessel worth a few £1,000s and sacrifice itself in the doing. But a mine that could distinguish between a merchant ship and a warship, that could wait patiently for a proper target, that was something altogether different. The Germans had developed acoustic mines that would listen for the distinctive noise signature of a warship's propellers and detonate when that signature matched certain parameters. These mines had already claimed significant British vessels and were causing increasing alarm in the Admiralty. The British response, when it finally came, was to leapfrog the German design entirely. Where the Germans had built a mine with a simple acoustic trigger, the British would build a mine that didn't simply listen, but truly listened. A mine that would compare what it heard against multiple parameters. A mine that would accumulate information, process it, and make a reasoned decision. In essence, the British would build the first automated decision-making weapon system in history. The genesis of the Oyster, or, as it was officially titled, the Type D Mark I, lay in a complex collaboration between the Admiralty, the Air Ministry, and a brilliant team of scientists and engineers working in comparative secrecy at the Admiralty Research Laboratory in Teddington. The lead researcher was a man named R.V. Dolphin, whose innovative thinking about acoustic detection systems would shape the entire project. Working alongside him were specialists in acoustics, engineering, electronics, and naval warfare. The ambition was breathtaking: create a mine that could not only detect the acoustic signature of a warship, but could distinguish it from other vessels, could track it, and could genuinely choose whether or not to detonate. The acoustic sensor at the heart of the Oyster was a hydrophone, essentially a listening device that could pick up the distinct frequencies generated by different ship types. A merchant ship with a slow, heavy diesel engine produces an entirely different acoustic profile to a warship with turbine-driven propulsion systems running at high revolutions. A destroyer produces one signature, a corvette another. The Oyster's hydrophone was paired with a sophisticated valve-based filter system and a switching mechanism of extraordinary precision. These components together formed what was, in essence, the first naval automatic target recognition system. When the hydrophone detected acoustic energy, that energy would be filtered into different frequency bands. A simple mechanical matching system would then compare those frequencies against a preset range. If the pattern matched the characteristics of a military warship, an electrical impulse would be triggered. This was not a binary on or off mechanism. Rather, it was a system of remarkable elegance and flexibility, capable of being calibrated to ignore specific frequencies, to exclude neutral ships, for instance, or shipping that the British wanted to protect. The Oyster itself was a large cylindrical device, approximately 1.8 meters, 5 feet 10 inches, in length and 1.5 meters, 4 feet 11 inches, in diameter, constructed from steel and internally compartmentalized. It weighed roughly 1,100 kilograms, 2,400 pounds, which meant it could only be deployed from specialist mine-laying ships or from the larger German ships that the British captured and repurposed. The mine contained multiple anti-ship charges arranged around the circumference of the cylinder, each capable of delivering devastating force through direct contact initiation as a backup should the acoustic system fail. But the true innovation lay in the sealed acoustic chamber. Inside this chamber sat the hydrophone, suspended on an ingenious vibration-dampening mounting system that prevented unwanted vibrations from the metal structure itself from triggering false positives. The filter system employed multiple valve stages, some of them specially developed for the purpose, which consumed power from large dry batteries also housed within the casing. These batteries had sufficient capacity for the mine to remain active for several months, listening with perfect patience through the traffic of a busy shipping lane. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The documentary work we do here relies on people who care about stories that might otherwise be forgotten entirely. The manufacturing process for the Oyster posed unique challenges. The precision required in calibrating the filters was so high that each mine had to be individually tested and adjusted before deployment. Production took place primarily at the Admiralty Research Laboratory itself, with components sourced from various manufacturers. The filters, in particular, required painstaking construction by specialists. Early production estimates suggest something in the region of 40 to 50 units were completed before the project reached full operational capacity, though exact figures remain classified. The laying of oyster mines required careful planning. They could not be deployed in the same manner as conventional mines. The mine-laying ship had to proceed at a specific speed to ensure proper placement and orientation of each device. The Oyster was first deployed in Norwegian waters in spring 1944, where German naval traffic remained concentrated and predictable. The operational results exceeded expectations. The Oyster's first confirmed kill came in June 1944, when the German minesweeper M387 was sunk in the North Sea after detonating against an oyster. That was impressive enough, but merely a prelude. By August, oysters were being laid with increasing frequency along German convoy routes and naval transit corridors. On August 8, 1944, the destroyer Z-35, as mentioned, was sunk. Within days, another destroyer, the Z-34, suffered catastrophic damage from an oyster, detonation, and limped back to port. The German Naval High Command was bewildered. Their sweepers couldn't clear these mines through conventional means. The mines seemed to anticipate which vessels were worth destroying. Acoustic decoys and noise-generating apparatus proved partially effective, but not fully reliable. To the German Navy, operating under increasing pressure and with resources increasingly scarce, the oyster represented something genuinely unsettling, a weapon that behaved almost with malevolent intelligence. Operations records suggest that at least a dozen German vessels were sunk or seriously damaged by oyster mines between summer 1944 and the end of the war in Europe. The psychological impact on German naval operations, however, exceeded even these impressive material results. The Kriegsmarine began routing ships around areas where oysters were suspected, adding weeks to voyages that were already perilously extended. Convoys were enlarged, reducing their ability to move quickly. Resources were diverted to experimental countermeasures. The oyster thus achieved something remarkable. It forced the enemy to reorganize entire maritime strategies around the mere presence of a handful of devices. The British advantage lay not merely in the sophistication of the oyster itself, but in how decisively it surpassed German attempts at similar technology. The Germans had developed acoustic mines, certainly, but their systems were fundamentally cruder. German mines could detect a ship and respond to that detection, but they could not discriminate with the same precision. They could not distinguish so clearly between a valuable military target and a neutral vessel that the German Navy might wish to protect. American mines, meanwhile, and the Americans were developing increasingly sophisticated systems themselves, tended toward a different philosophy: sheer quantity and reliability rather than discrimination and elegance. An American minefield was meant to be a nuisance that any ship could potentially detonate against. The British approach was far more surgical. Where the Americans built a hammer, the British built a scalpel. The legacy of the oyster is complicated by secrecy and by history's tendency to overlook the significance of technologies that worked precisely because they were kept obscure. The mine sank at least a dozen ships in the latter half of 1944 and into 1945. Its effect on German naval strategy was measurable and significant. Yet the oyster remains, in many historical accounts, a footnote, a curiosity mentioned briefly in the context of World War II naval warfare, rarely examined with the depth that such an innovative system deserves. Perhaps this is because the oyster's success was, paradoxically, so complete that it required no further development during the war years. Once deployed, it simply worked. There was no glamorous human story attached to it, no famous submarine commander or celebrated naval battle. There was simply a device doing its function with perfect, inhuman efficiency. In the immediate post-war years, the oyster became forgotten almost as quickly as it had been deployed. The secrets that had surrounded it during development remained largely protected during the peace, and the mine's true capabilities were slow to become general knowledge among historians and naval strategists. Only in recent decades has serious scholarly attention been paid to the oyster's significance as a conceptual precursor to modern automated weapons systems. The technology influenced post-war mine design on both sides of the emerging Cold War. Soviet engineers, who obtained whatever captured specimens they could, built upon the basic principles to develop their own acoustic mines with enhanced discrimination. The British pursued further refinement, developing successors to the oyster that incorporated transistor-based electronics in place of the valve systems, though the fundamental concept remained unchanged. The American Navy, initially skeptical of the acoustic approach, eventually adopted similar systems. Today, modern naval mines still employ principles that the Oyster pioneered: acoustic detection, multiple-stage triggering systems, discrimination between target types. Surviving examples of the Oyster can be found in the collections of the Royal Navy Submarine Museum and in certain restricted military archives where the technical specifications remain closely guarded. One disarmed specimen can occasionally be viewed by special arrangement, though its interior mechanisms remain a closely held secret even now, more than 80 years after its creation. What, then, did the Oyster truly accomplish? It accomplished something deeper than any mere tally of ships sunk or damage inflicted. The Oyster proved a principle: that a weapon system could be trusted with consequential decisions. It could listen, analyze, and act with the kind of judgment that humans found uncanny precisely because it was so perfectly rational. There was no mercy in the Oyster's logic, but there was an austere kind of righteousness. It did exactly and only what it was designed to do, without cruelty, without hesitation, without the fog of emotion that colors human decision-making. In that lay both its power and its unsettling nature. The Oyster was, in a genuine sense, the first thinking weapon that Britain, or perhaps any nation, had produced. It was automated decision-making at a level of sophistication that would not be matched in other military contexts until well into the Cold War. That such an extraordinary achievement could be largely forgotten speaks to the strange nature of British institutional culture, where the most successful innovations are often quietly forgotten, filed away in locked cabinets, discussed only in the most restricted circles. The war moved on. The Oyster's work was done, and so it was left behind, waiting in the depths, still listening perhaps, as if forever poised to make its next impossible choice. In the end, the true legacy of the Oyster is this: that in 1944, when digital computers were still vast experimental machines, when the very concept of artificial intelligence existed nowhere except in the speculative imagination, Britain had built something that would have seemed to contemporary observers like science fiction given material form. A mind that thought, a mind that decided, a mind that, in its cold and perfect way, was the future arriving decades ahead of schedule.